Thank you, everyone. Wang. Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Okay, Wayne, wherever we're comfortable here. The light's good here?
All right.
Yeah, I noticed myself, it's been almost 30 years since I've seen it, but there were some definite, a little bit of nips and tucks here at the end. My recollection is at the end of the film, we actually saw a glimpse of the family in San Francisco with kids. Am I remembering that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the original ending, but
yeah.
I thought...
Tell us a little bit about your thought in reapproaching the film to recut it for now.
Mostly it's just simplifying things. I thought the film, it ran over 2 hours originally. It was a little bit too long. And since it's kind of a comedy, I just decided to make it tighter.
Very good.
Yeah.
And is it going to be re-released?
I hope so. Columbia is trying to figure out how they're going to bring it back out as a director's cut.
Very good. So I'll just have a couple of questions to get us started. Please be thinking of a question or two that you'd like to ask, and then we'll have a little time for you to ask your questions. For those who don't, do you have some remarks that you want to make about it?
Just a quick little note, watching this thing, and I was talking about it earlier, I mean, I really, some of the crew that went with me to Hong Kong, this was a really difficult film. This is one of the very early films that was started by American Playhouse, which is part of PBS at the time, by Lindsay Law. And then we took it to Columbia Studios, where David Putnam had just started working. And it's one of the very few films about Chinese Americans that was actually, partially supported by a studio.
Right.
But we had so little money, and we went to Hong Kong, and it was really difficult to do. But then it became kind of a stepping stone for Joy Luck Club, really, in a very, strange way. So.
Thank you. Yes, for those who aren't familiar with Wayne's filmography, right out of graduate school, where you made an experimental feature, you do Chan is Missing, somewhat of an experimental feature based on your own experiences in San Francisco, Chinatown, and some of the folks you met there. And then you did Dim Sum, and I believe the star of Dim Sum is actually visiting with us today. Lauren Chu, many of you. Wonderful, wonderful film. So this was kind of the third themed film about the Chinese in America, and based, as many folks know, on one of the first Chinese American novels, Louis Chu's Eat a Bowl of Tea. Do you have anything to say about sort of the evolution, or how you came to kind of decide that this would be, the next film you would do, a period piece, which is really difficult and quite different from those first two films about the Chinese American community?
Well, I was, throughout going to school, Eat a Bowl of Tea was always a film that it was a novel that I was very interested in, and I couldn't quite figure out how to do it. I mean, Chan is Missing was done basically from a grant from you and NEA, and to make a film like this would be impossible, but, step by step, I was trying to kind of build up to a way to make something like this. So it was not easy, but we got it done.
And then tell us a little bit about the casting. Of course, Cora, your wife, at the time, even she was a movie star in Hong Kong. And then Russell Wang was pretty young and new to filmmaking.
I think this is his first film.
Wow.
So I met him, I said, oh, this guy looks great, so let's put him in the film. Especially since he had so many bed scenes with my wife, so I thought he should probably do it. By the way, I had forgotten, there are so many big stars from Hong Kong in this movie. I mean, almost everyone that appears as even a side character. Like for example, the fat lady who steps on the ear. She's a huge comedian in Hong Kong. I mean, there are just a lot of stars, and the guy who plays the seducer, he is a very, very big comedian called Zheng Jiwei. So he's all over the place these days doing TV.
Wow.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, from this, in a way, it sets up Joy Luck Club, which is also based on a novel that's very important to the Chinese American community. And then later on, of course, you do 1,000 Years of Good Prayers and Princess of Nebraska, and continuing to kind of explore the evolution of the Chinese American community. So we are continue to be in debt to you.
Well, there's a part of me that still feels like, not much has been done in the last, 30 years about Chinese Americans. Especially things that are kind of a little more, not just independent films, but films that can kind of reach a larger audience. I hope, Crazy Rich Kids or whatever it's called is interesting. But if you really look at it, there's really very little in the last 30 years.
Yes.
There are a lot of indie films, really good indie films, so the problem still is trying to reach that mainstream audience.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
That reminds me, we just heard news that Fresh Off the Boat has been renewed for another season, so there some things are improving. So do we have some questions from you? Yeah, well, let's start over there.
Was the choice of English as kind of the predominant language that the characters used, do you think that was an accurate depiction of the time?
Well,
Of that?
it wasn't an accurate depiction. I think this is in my mind, when I made it, when I decided it was a romantic comedy, I decided to kind of stylize it in a way, rather than I had made China's Missing, Dim Sum, and those were really realistic films. So I thought, I want to do something that's a little more stylized. There is, then the book is all in English.
And
There are a lot of dirty languages in there, which I've forgotten also. Which is in the book, by the way, because those old guys really cussed a lot.
That's interesting because it's made for public television, and of
Right.
course, they would, if they had known what those guys were saying, they would.
Well, that was sort of the irony of it. It was shown all over America with this really, really strong language, and nobody knew that it was there. So that's very subversive in that way.
Very good. Any more questions? Yes, go ahead.
So I was so impressed by the quality of the acting, and yet we know that there aren't that many all-Asian cast opportunities. Are the actors continuing to have opportunities in acting, all the ones that performed this wonderful movie 30 years ago? Are their careers having opportunities to flourish and
Well, yeah, most of the actors, like I said, were from Hong Kong, because we couldn't afford to bring actors in. So they have all become pretty big stars in different ways. So
in Hong
Russell,
Kong, but how about in the U.S.?
in the U.S. it would be pretty impossible. Like Russell Wang, who's a really good-looking guy. He does kung fu. He was in a few films that were pretty strong, but never really got a career out of it. And he ended up working a lot in Hong Kong and China. So it's not easy. Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things that was funny that I forgot is we had so little money. The banquet scene, there were a lot of extras, and we couldn't afford to get real extras. And it turned out I couldn't get them to do anything. And it turned out they were all from the mental institution. Anyway.
Yes, in the back.
What is your future project?
Well, there's this wonderful little short story that Chang Rei Li wrote called, Coming Home Again. It's one of his early writings. So I'm going back to my China's Missing days and just kind of doing it. So we're gathering together a small crew. Cam is helping us, and we're just going to shoot it with almost no money.
That should be fun.
Yeah.
We did better than that.
Yeah.
Yes, over here, right?
Are there other films from your back catalog that you're gonna go back to revisit and possibly make director's cuts?
Yeah. Well, there are. I'd love to go back into every one of them because I made so many mistakes in every one. And they look. Actually, if you take film negative and go to digital, it actually looks really good. So, but it costs a lot of money. So that's kind of the problem with it.
Yes, some of you may know, just at the San Francisco International Film Festival, Wang showed a reworked Smoke, which is quite well received. Other questions? I may not. Okay. Yes, sir.
My class, the Chinese American identities, that talked about the eat a bowl of tea a lot during a special day. It was like a lot of baby boomers, Chinese immigrants, and American borns. Like, oh yeah, I can relate to the eat a bowl of tea, and anyone after was like 1975 or something, like 1965. It was like, oh, what is this? I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think this film, when I look at it now, even it's much more relevant in some ways because the younger generation knows nothing about the Exclusion Act, the immigration laws, and how Chinatown really was affected by it. And even though the film has a lot of, it's in the book, there's a lot of problems with Chinatown that needed to be dealt with, and literally, as the title at the end says, you kind of have to take this bitter tea to kind of get through it. And a lot from this generation know nothing about that history, which is very sad.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect segue. We have a film we co-produced, the Chinese Exclusion Act. It will air at the end of the month on PBS, and it helps explain some of this context that, particularly for the Chinese that came from Guangdong, for a 60-year period were excluded. And the Chinese that were here through various means of resistance and paper sons and things like that, the young men would, and particularly after World War II, if they were veterans, could go back and marry and bring their brides back. And that's the context. And I think it is so interesting that the impotence that Ben Oy faces, in a way, is this consequence of being unsure of a society that's been so disrupted, and his mother is back in China, that kind of situation. So yeah, it's a very important piece of Chinese American history, and we thank you, Wayne, for doing this. It is wonderful to revisit it, and we look forward to your next project.
Thank you.